The radio crackled with pure terror. "We're taking fire. Multiple casualties. We need Medevac now." But there was one problem. The landing zone was a death trap. Every pilot had refused the mission. Every pilot, except one. A 5'4" woman who was about to do the impossible. If you love stories of real American heroes who risk everything to save lives, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. This channel, Silent Warriors, brings you the most incredible untold stories of courage. Now, let's jump into this unbelievable true story. March 9, 2009, Afghanistan. The sun had just set over the Zabul province, and darkness swallowed the rugged mountains whole. Captain Sarah Matthews sat in the operations tent at Forward Operating Base Lagman, sipping bitter coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She was exhausted. She'd already flown to Medevac missions that day, extracting wounded soldiers from hostile territory. Her body ached. Her eyes burned from the dust and fatigue. She should have been done for the night, but war doesn't care about your schedule. At 20:47 hours, the call came in. A platoon from the 10th Mountain Division had walked into a Taliban ambush in the Shahjoy Valley. The insurgents had waited until the American soldiers entered a narrow canyon before opening fire from three sides. It was a massacre. The radio operator's voice shook with desperation. "We have 9 urgent surgical casualties, multiple gunshot wounds. One soldier lost his leg. They're bleeding out. We need birds in the air now." The operations officer looked at the map and his face went pale. The landing zone was in a valley surrounded by 300-foot cliffs. Taliban fighters had positions on the high ground, and there was no moon that night, meaning any helicopter would be flying blind into a kill box. He looked around the tent at the available pilots. One by one, they shook their heads. "Sir, that's a suicide mission," one pilot said. "We can't get a bird in there without visual. And the second we turn on our lights, we're target practice." Another chimed in. "We need to wait for Apache gunship support. Give us 30 minutes to coordinate." But the medic on the ground responded immediately. "We don't have 30 minutes. These boys are dying right now." That's when Captain Sarah Matthews stood up. "I'll go." The room went silent. The operations officer looked at her. "Matthews, did you hear the situation report? There's no cover, no gunship support. It's pitch black. The Taliban owns that valley right now." Sarah zipped up her flight suit and grabbed her helmet. "I heard the report, sir. I also heard American soldiers bleeding to death. Respectfully, we're wasting time talking when we should be flying." The operations officer studied her face. He'd served with Sarah for 8 months now. He knew her record. 63 combat missions, 0 casualties lost in her care. She was the best pilot he had. He nodded slowly. "Get your crew ready. You're cleared for immediate departure." Sarah walked out into the Afghan night, the rotor wash from other helicopters blowing dust into her eyes. Her crew chief, Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, was already at the Black Hawk, running pre-flight checks. "We really doing this, ma'am?" he asked. Sarah strapped into the pilot's seat. "We're doing this. Get the medics loaded. Tell them to prep for mass casualties." At 2,103 hours, Sarah's Black Hawk lifted off into the darkness. The flight to Shahjoy Valley should have taken 12 minutes. But Sarah couldn't fly direct. She had to stay low, using the terrain to mask her approach, weaving between mountain ridges to avoid enemy radar and RPG teams. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant James Chun, kept his eyes on the instruments, approaching the valley into minutes. Still no visual on the LZ. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls, but her heart hammered in her chest. She'd been trained for this. Thousands of hours of flight time, hundreds of combat missions, but this was different. The radio crackled. It was the platoon sergeant on the ground. "Medevac bird, this is ground element. Be advised, we're still taking sporadic fire from the ridgeline. Our casualties are critical. Please hurry." Sarah keyed her mic. "Ground element, this is Medevac 3-1. We're 90 seconds out. I need you to mark your position with IR strobes only. Do not use any white light. Confirm." "Roger, 3-1. IR strobes only." The valley came into view, a black chasm between two mountain ridges. Sarah began her descent. That's when the first tracer rounds lit up the sky. "Taking fire. 3 o'clock high," Chun shouted. Green tracers arced through the darkness, some passing just meters from the helicopter's tail rotor. Sarah threw the Black Hawk into a hard bank, dropping altitude fast, using gravity and momentum to make them a harder target. Flares, pop flares, she ordered. Rodriguez launched countermeasures, and bright flares erupted from the helicopter, floating down on tiny parachutes, decoys designed to confuse heat-seeking missiles. The Taliban fighters on the ridgeline adjusted their fire, bullets punching through the thin skin of the valley below them. "How far to the LZ?" Sarah asked, her voice calm despite the chaos. "400 meters, Chun replied, his knuckles white on his armrest. Sarah could see the IR strobes now, tiny pinpricks of infrared light only visible through her night vision goggles. The soldiers on the ground had formed a defensive perimeter around their wounded, but the landing zone was impossibly small, barely large enough for a helicopter, with boulders on 3 sides and a 60-degree slope. "This is insane," Chun muttered. "There's no way we fit in there." Sarah didn't respond. She was already calculating angles, wind speed, rotor clearance. She'd trained for tight insertions at Fort Rucker. She'd practiced pinnacle landings on mountainsides. But never under fire, never in complete darkness, never with 9 dying soldiers waiting for her. She pushed those thoughts away and focused on the one thing that mattered: getting those boys home. "Ground element, this is Medevac 3-1. I'm coming in from the north. Clear those boulders on the east side. I need every inch of that LZ. Roger, 3-1. LZ is clear, but ma'am, be advised, we're still taking contact." As if to emphasize the point, a new stream of tracers ripped across the valley, this time from the western ridge. The Taliban had them in a crossfire. Sarah ignored the bullets and focused on the landing. She brought the Black Hawk down in a controlled hover, the rotor wash kicking up a massive cloud of dust that obscured everything. She was flying blind now, using only her instruments and instinct. 50 feet, 30 feet, 15 feet. A boulder appeared in her night vision, barely 3 feet from the rear rotor. She adjusted, sliding the helicopter laterally, balancing on a knife's edge, between a successful landing and a catastrophic crash. 10 feet, 5 feet, the wheels touched down. "We're down. Go, go, go," Rodriguez shouted. The side doors flew open, and the to-flight medics, Corporals Lisa Chong and Devin Harris, jumped out into the firefight. Soldiers rushed forward, carrying their wounded brothers on stretchers, some dragging casualties who couldn't walk. Sarah kept the engines running, ready to lift off the second everyone was aboard. Bullets cracked overhead. One round punched through the windscreen, missing Chun by inches, showering him with plexiglass fragments. "I'm okay. I'm okay," he yelled, blood running down his face from a dozen tiny cuts. Chong and Harris worked with desperate speed, pulling casualties into the helicopter's cargo bay, starting IVs, applying pressure bandages, doing everything they could to keep these soldiers alive. Sarah watched in her mirror as a young soldier, couldn't have been more than 19, was loaded aboard. His leg was gone below the knee, his uniform soaked with blood. He was unconscious. Another soldier, this one with gunshot wounds to his chest and abdomen, was crying for his mother. "How many more?" Sarah shouted over the engine noise. "3 more coming," Rodriguez called back. A massive explosion erupted on the ridgeline. The Taliban had started firing RPGs now, trying to destroy the helicopter before it could escape. One rocket streaked past, missing the tail rotor by less than 10 feet, and exploded against the far cliff face. The shockwave rocked the Black Hawk. "We need to go," Chun shouted, "now." But Sarah held position, not without everyone. 2 more stretchers arrived, then the final casualty, a sergeant who refused a stretcher despite a gunshot wound to his shoulder, limping to the helicopter on his own power. He looked at Sarah through the cockpit window and gave her a thumbs up. That was the signal. "Everybody's in. Go, go, go," Rodriguez screamed. Sarah pulled maximum power, and the overloaded Black Hawk struggled to lift off. They had 9 casualties aboard, plus all their equipment, plus a full combat load of fuel. The helicopter was at least 500 pounds over its recommended takeoff weight. The engine screamed in protest. The Taliban saw the helicopter rising and focused all their fire on it. Tracers filled the sky like a deadly light show. Sarah tilted the nose forward and dove down the valley, building airspeed, sacrificing altitude for velocity. Another RPG launched. Sarah saw it in her peripheral vision and jerked the stick hard left. The rocket passed through the space they'd occupied 1 second earlier. Damage report. Sarah barked. Multiple hits to the fuselage. Rodriguez called out. No critical systems affected. Hydraulics holding. Engines normal. Behind them, the Taliban fire faded as they escaped the valley. But Sarah's mission was far from over. Chang's voice came through the intercom, tight with stress. "Captain, we're losing the leg amputee. His pressure's dropping. We need to get to the hospital now." Sarah checked her navigation. The nearest surgical hospital was at Kandahar Airfield, 38 minutes away at cruising speed. She pushed the throttles to emergency power. The Black Hawk wasn't designed for sustained high-speed flight at low altitude, but Sarah didn't care. She flew the helicopter to its absolute limits, skimming over villages and compounds at 180 miles per hour, barely 50 feet off the ground. Chun monitored the casualties through the internal camera. He could see Chang and Harris working frantically, performing CPR on one soldier whose heart had stopped, managing IVs on 3 others, calling out vitals to each other in medical shorthand. "Captain," Chun said quietly, "that kid with the amputated leg, he's not going to make it." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Yes, he is. We're not losing anyone. Not tonight." She pushed the helicopter even harder. The airframe shuddered. Warning lights flickered on the instrument panel. The engines were overheating. But Sarah didn't back off. 20 minutes to Kandahar. 15 minutes. "We lost his pulse again," Chang shouted, starting compressions. 10 minutes. Sarah could see the lights of Kandahar Airfield now, a constellation of man-made stars in the Afghan darkness. "Kandahar Tower, this is Medevac 3-1, declaring emergency. I have 9 urgent surgical casualties inbound, requesting priority landing and immediate surgical teams on the flight line." "Roger, 3-1, you're cleared direct to the hospital pad. Medical teams are standing by." 5 minutes. Sarah brought the Black Hawk in fast and steep, a combat landing, touching down on the hospital pad in a cloud of dust and exhaust. Surgical teams were already running toward them. The next 90 minutes were a blur. Sarah shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Chun put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Captain. You saved them." But Sarah couldn't celebrate yet, not until she knew they'd all survived. She walked into the hospital and found the surgical ward. A doctor, still in his bloody scrubs, met her in the hallway. "You the pilot?" he asked. Sarah nodded. The doctor shook his head in amazement. "I've been doing trauma surgery for 15 years, including 3 deployments. I've never seen casualties in this bad shape make it to the table alive. You saved their lives by getting them here so fast. Every single one of them has a fighting chance now because of you." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. "The soldier with the amputated leg? In surgery now. It's going to be a long road, but he's stable. He's going to make it." Sarah returned to the operations center, expecting to finally get some rest. Instead, she was met with controlled chaos. Another unit had been hit. This time, it was a convoy ambushed on the highway between Kandahar and Helmand province. The blast from an IED had overturned a Humvee, trapping soldiers inside, and Taliban fighters had followed up with small arms fire. 6 more casualties, 3 critical. The operations officer looked at Sarah. "Matthews, I know you just got back, but where's the LZ?" Sarah interrupted. He looked relieved. "Highway checkpoint 7. But Sarah, you've been flying for 6 hours straight. You need rest." Sarah was already walking toward her helicopter. "I'll rest when there aren't soldiers dying. Get me the coordinates." Rodriguez saw her coming and started the pre-flight checks without being asked. He knew Captain Matthews well enough by now. "How bad?" he asked simply. "Bad enough," Sarah replied, climbing back into the pilot's seat. They were airborne again in 5 minutes. The highway checkpoint was easier to access than the valley. No mountains, no narrow canyons, but it came with its own problems. The IED had created a crater in the road. and the overturned Humvee was still burning, sending thick black smoke into the sky. The Taliban fighters had withdrawn after initial contact, but they were still in the area, watching, waiting for an opportunity. Sarah approached from the east, staying low, using a wadi for cover until the last possible moment. This time, the landing was smoother. She sat down on the highway itself, and the casualties were loaded quickly by the combat medics who'd been treating them. 2 soldiers with severe burns, 1 with a traumatic brain injury, 3 with shrapnel wounds. All of them were conscious, which was a good sign. Sarah lifted off and headed back to Kandahar, flying a different route to avoid potential ambush sites. 22 minutes later, she delivered them safely to the hospital. 6 more lives saved, but the night still wasn't over. At 01 for 7 hours, Sarah was refueling her helicopter when the third call came in. A remote outpost in Helmand province had been overrun by Taliban fighters. The 15 soldiers stationed there had held out for 3 hours before a quick reaction force broke through to rescue them, but the cost had been high. 7 casualties, 2 were critical. 1 had been shot in the neck. The other had sustained multiple fragment wounds from a grenade. The problem was the outpost's location. It was 65 miles away, deep in hostile territory, and Sarah's helicopter was low on fuel. She'd have to refuel at a forward arming and refueling point halfway there, adding time to the mission. Time these soldiers might not have, but there was no choice. Rodriguez, get us topped off on fuel. Chun, plot the fastest route to Farp Zulu, and then to the outpost. We're going to have to push the engines hard again. They launched at 02:03 hours. The refueling stop at FARP Zulu took 8 precious minutes. Sarah paced the flight line while the fuel pumped, watching the clock, doing the math in her head. Every minute counted. They lifted off and pushed north into Helmand. The outpost appeared on the horizon, a small compound surrounded by blast walls, lit by generator-powered floodlights. Sarah could see the quick reaction force vehicles still there, providing security. She brought the Black Hawk in fast, flared hard, and touched down inside the compound. The casualties were ready, already on stretchers, the medics having done everything possible to stabilize them. Sarah watched as they were loaded aboard. The soldier with the neck wound was unconscious, his face pale from blood loss. The other critical casualty was awake but in obvious pain. "You're going home, brother," Rodriguez told him as they secured his stretcher. "Captain Matthews is the best. You're gonna be okay." Sarah lifted off and turned south toward Kandahar. But 5 minutes into the flight, Chang's voice came through the intercom, tight with urgency. "Captain, the neck wound is deteriorating. His airway is compromising. I need to intubate, but I can't do it while we're moving this fast. The turbulence is too much." Sarah was in an impossible position. If she slowed down, the soldier might not make it to the hospital in time. If she didn't slow down, Chun couldn't perform the procedure that would save his life. She made a decision. "Chun, find me a flat stretch of ground. I'm setting down." "Ma'am, we're still in hostile territory. Find me a landing zone," Sarah said firmly. Chun scanned the terrain. "There, that field, 2 o'clock. It looks clear." Sarah descended rapidly and touched down in what appeared to be an abandoned farm field. She kept the engines running, ready for immediate takeoff. Behind her, Chang worked with steady hands, inserting the breathing tube that would keep the soldier alive. Harris monitored his vital signs, calling out numbers: heart rate 120, blood pressure 90/60, oxygen saturation 88%. 60 seconds passed. 90 seconds. Sarah watched the landscape around them, expecting Taliban fighters to emerge from the darkness at any moment. 2 minutes. "Got IT," Chang shouted. "He's tubed. Let's go." Sarah pulled maximum power and lifted off, leaving the field behind. 23 minutes later, they touched down at Kandahar for the 3rd time that night. The surgical teams rushed forward. Sarah climbed out of the cockpit and watched as the casualties were rushed inside. Her flight suit was soaked with sweat. Her hands were cramping from gripping the controls. Her vision was blurring from exhaustion, but every single soldier was alive. Sarah walked into the operations center, fully expecting to be grounded. She'd been flying for nearly 8 hours straight, well beyond the recommended maximum. But when she entered, the operations officer looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Desperation. "Sarah, I'm not going to order you to fly again, but I'm asking." A special forces team got hit during a raid in Uruzgan province. They have 4 urgent surgical casualties, and the only other Medevac helicopter just went down with mechanical failure. "You're the only bird available." Sarah looked at Chun and Rodriguez. Chun's face was cut and bruised from the shattered windscreen hours earlier, but he nodded. Rodriguez gave her a tired grin. "We started this night together, ma'am. Might as well finish it together." Sarah turned back to the operations officer. "Send us the coordinates." They were airborne again at 0320 hours. The Special Forces team's location was 78 miles away, the farthest mission yet. Sarah flew through exhaustion, her body operating on pure willpower and military discipline. The landscape below was a black void, broken only occasionally by the lights of small villages. When they arrived at the LZ, the scene was chaotic. The raid had gone wrong from the start. Intelligence had been bad. What was supposed to be a small Taliban compound turned out to be a major insurgent stronghold. The SF team had fought their way out, but at a cost. 4 wounded operators, all with serious injuries. But these were quiet professionals. Despite their wounds, they helped load themselves onto the helicopter, refusing to show weakness. Sarah lifted off and turned for home. The flight back to Kandahar felt like it took forever. Sarah's eyes kept trying to close. She drank water. She slapped her own face. She talked to Chun about anything and everything just to stay alert. "You know what I'm going to do when this deployment is over?" Chun said, his voice slurred with fatigue. "I'm going to sleep for 3 days straight. Then I'm going to eat the biggest steak I can find. Then I'm going to sleep for 3 more days." Sarah managed a tired laugh. "That sounds like the best plan I've ever heard." The lights of Kandahar appeared on the horizon. Sarah had never been so happy to see anything in her life. She brought the Black Hawk in for her 4th landing of the night, touching down so gently that Chun looked at her in surprise. "After all that, you greased the landing?" Sarah shrugged. "These guys have been through enough. Figured I'd give them a smooth ride home." The SF casualties were rushed into surgery. Sarah shut down the helicopter and just sat there for a long moment, her hands still on the controls. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said gently, "we're done. You can let go now." Sarah released the controls and climbed out of the cockpit. The sun was starting to rise over the Afghan mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She'd been flying for 9 hours and 43 minutes, for separate missions into hostile territory, for successful extractions, and when she did the math, she realized the magnitude of what her crew had accomplished. The first mission, 9 casualties saved. The second mission, 6 casualties saved. The third mission, 7 casualties saved. The fourth mission, 4 casualties saved. 26 American soldiers brought home alive in a single night, but that number didn't include the wounded from the other units they'd supported, the close calls, the missions that would have failed without their success. When the final count was done, when every direct and indirect save was tallied, the number was staggering. 89 lives saved or protected in one night. Sarah didn't think about awards or recognition. She fell into her bunk and slept for 16 hours straight. But the story of that night spread through the military community like wildfire. Other pilots talked about it in hushed, reverent tones. The wounded soldiers she'd saved told everyone who would listen about the pilot who flew through hell to bring them home. 6 months later, Sarah was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, one of the highest honors a military aviator can receive. The citation read, in part, for extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, Captain Matthews displayed exceptional courage and skill while performing multiple combat rescue missions under intense enemy fire. Her actions directly resulted in the preservation of numerous American lives and reflect great credit upon herself. The United States Army and the United States of America. But for Sarah, the real reward came in a different form. 2 years after that night in Afghanistan, Sarah was attending a military ball in North Carolina. She was standing at the bar, ordering a drink, when someone tapped her shoulder. She turned around and found herself face to face with a young man in a dress uniform. He was standing with the aid of a prosthetic leg. "Captain Matthews," he said, his voice uncertain. Sarah looked at him more closely, and suddenly she recognized him. He was the soldier with the amputated leg from that first mission, the one who'd almost died on the flight to Kandahar. "I'm not sure if you remember me," he continued, "but you flew me out of Shahjoy Valley. The doctors said I flatlined twice on that flight, said if you'd taken even 5 more minutes to get me to the hospital, I wouldn't have made it." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Because of you, I got to come home. I got to meet my daughter. She was born 7 months after I got wounded. Her name is Sarah. We named her after the pilot who saved my life." He pulled out his phone and showed her a picture of a beautiful little girl with bright eyes and a big smile. Sarah couldn't stop the tears this time. "I don't know what to say," she managed. The young man smiled. "You don't have to say anything, ma'am. I just wanted you to know that when you saved my life that night, you saved my family's life too. My wife got her husband back. My daughter got her father. And all because you were willing to fly into hell to bring me home." They talked for an hour, and he introduced her to other soldiers who'd been on missions she'd flown. Each one had a story. Each one had a life that had continued because of what she'd done. Sarah retired from the Army in 2015 after 12 years of service. She'd flown to 187 combat missions and personally evacuated over 500 wounded soldiers. But that one night in March 2009 remained the defining moment of her career. Today, her story is taught at Fort Rucker, where Army helicopter pilots receive their training. Young pilots, both male and female, study her decisions, her techniques, her courage. They learn that being a combat pilot isn't about physical strength or aggression. It's about skill, decision-making under pressure, and the willingness to risk everything to save others. Sarah now works as a flight instructor for civilian medical helicopters. She teaches new pilots the same lessons she learned in Afghanistan. Stay calm in chaos, trust your training, never give up on a patient, and remember that every person you're carrying is someone's son or daughter, someone's husband or wife, someone's mother or father. When asked about that night, Sarah always says the same thing. "I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just doing my job." Those soldiers on the ground, they're the real heroes. They're the ones who faced the enemy. They're the ones who bled for our country. I just gave them a ride home. But those who were there know the truth. They know that without Sarah Matthews, dozens of American families would have received folded flags and knock on their doors in the middle of the night. They know that her courage, skill, and determination saved not just lives, but future's children who would be born, weddings that would happen, grandchildren who would someday hear stories about their grandfather or grandmother who served. 89 lives in one night, but the ripple effects of those saves continue to spread, touching hundreds of other lives, creating a legacy that will last for generations. That's the power of one person who refuses to quit, one person who hears impossible and responds, "Watch me," one person who looks at the worst circumstances imaginable and says, "I'm going anyway." Captain Sarah Matthews proved that heroism isn't about gender, size, or physical strength. It's about heart. It's about the willingness to put others before yourself. It's about looking at a mission that everyone else has refused and saying, "I'll go." On March 9, 2009, when every other pilot said that rescue was impossible, a 5'4" woman climbed into her helicopter and did the impossible for times in one night. She flew through enemy fire, landed in impossible conditions, and brought home 89 American heroes. And then, the next morning, she woke up and did it all over again. Because that's what silent warriors do. If this story inspired you, make sure you're subscribed to Silent Warriors, where we bring you the most incredible true stories of American heroes who deserve to be remembered. Hit that like button, Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story, and drop a comment telling us what you think about Captain Matthew's courage. These heroes' stories deserve to be told, and we're here to tell them. Until next time, remember, heroes walk among us, and sometimes they're the ones we least expect. Stay strong, stay inspired, and never forget the warriors who sacrifice everything for our freedom.